Dr. Barbieri is the president of ISS Inc., which is a fluorescence instrumentation company here in Champaign that many people may not know a lot about, but they're a pretty good-sized company, and they have customers all over the world. They've grown really globally. They have several industrial customers that he'll be discussing here today, including the pharmaceutical industry and research institutions that use their equipment. They're doing final point of assembly and some manufacturing on-site here in Champaign, so it's more than just an R&D operation. And we thought that that would be an interesting story to hear more about. Ben is one of these people that you'll meet and you'll just like when you get to know him, I think, as well. Many of us admire him, and I'll say his wife, too, who's also a lovely individual. They're great people to have in this community and get involved in many things. And so we're very lucky to have them as part of our tech community, and we're thankful to have Dr. Barbieri talking to you today. So thank you, Ben, and welcome.
Thank you, Laura, for the nice introduction, and thank you all for having me here, and thank you for the invitation. So for the ones of you who do not know, I have an accent, and probably you learn now, by now, this one. I'm from Italy. I came here about 25 years ago. Now, the funny story is that I came here to stay for 3 months. And this was 25 years ago. So now when I meet some people who come to the university as a postdoc who plan to stay here for 1 year or 2, I said, sure, sure. Anyway, let me tell you why I decided to stay here, because this is also what people keep asking me. When I moved here for the famous 3 months, and I was working a little bit with people in physics, I was astonished by one particular fact. And the fact is that you could have access to technology, to items, in a very short time. Previously, I was working at the university in Italy, and I needed an integrated circuit. So the procedure was place the order, and then wait for 3 weeks. If you're lucky, you will get the proper chip. If that doesn't work, you need to wait another 3 weeks. Well, I got here, and I placed my first order, and the person on the other side of the telephone asked me, do you want it blue or red? I said, what? I didn't know about UPS blue, UPS red. And then when I realized, I said, wow, I can have the chip tomorrow morning. In 2 days, I can work. So then I moved from life in slow motion to life to fast motion. And this is really what made me like a lot about America, the fact that how the organization of work worked. Anyway, let me go back to my presentation. So this is a picture of our company, ISS. We are located on the other side of town in Interstate Research Park, and we've been there for several years, since 1999. So the research park here wasn't here at the time. We have been established in 1989. These are a few facts about the company. And we are also ISO certified. The question is what ISS does. We build instrumentation that is used in research. Our customers are academia, universities, but also companies worldwide, especially pharmaceutical companies. So our tools, our gadgets are used in research. And this has also another impact on the way we do customer support, but even on the type of people that we employ, the background of the people. Just to get you not too bored, I added a few pictures of some of these instruments. This is a confocal microscope. What a confocal microscope does is to acquire images on a micrometric scale. For instance, here we have images of a cell. What people do, they take a protein and they study how that protein goes inside the cell. And once it's inside the cell, does it go to the nucleus? Does it interact with other proteins? So these are the questions that this type of instruments address. Another instrument, this is a fluorometer. A fluorometer is an instrument that uses light, sends light over a substance, and is used to study interactions between molecules. Let's say a pharmaceutical company identifies a potential new drug. Once they have this target, they have to characterize the molecule, making sure that the molecule interacts properly with other molecules. Let's say be the DNA, RNA, or other proteins that we have in our body. In this specific case, it was used as an application to detect copper ion in seawater. So the instrument had a fiber optic attached to it. The fiber optic was 250 yards long. It's dropped in the ocean on board of this vessel, the RV Nord, and at different depth, it can measure the concentration of the copper ion. And this has been done out in the Atlantic, in front of Boston, but also in the Pacific. This is yet another instrument which is a totally different class of instruments. And you actually see here the person who designed it, Mr. Kevin Moore here, who used to work for us, and is a tissue oximeter. It measures oxygenation in the tissues using near-infrared light. The tissue can be the muscle, can be the brain. There are different probes, and the key factor of this instrument is that the instrument is non-invasive. And this is used in sport medicine, but is also used in neurosurgery when neurosurgeons want to follow patients after they had brain or heart surgery. Is used for monitoring premature babies, several areas. Currently, we are in the process of applying for making a version of this instrument that is suitable for clinical use. The version that you see here is still used for medical research. This is uses a similar technology, Imagent, and it brings light to the skull, to the brain, using this helmet-type device or headgear. And the application of this instrument is to see activated areas of the brain. Let's say I move my finger, so there is a group of cells of neuron in a specific location that is activated. It's used by cognitive neuroscientists, but now there are also some medical applications. NASA has a couple of these instruments to assess the response of people, of the sensory cortex of the brain of some people. So the beginning, I started several years ago, 1990. In fact, this is so long ago that at the time, the color photography wasn't invented yet, and so it's black and white. This is when I started with my partner Fabio. We actually started truly in a basement of our home in Urbana, and after a few months, even because the famous UPS red and blue truck was coming to the neighborhood, we decided to rent a place, and this was our first place at the corner of Windsor and New York. These buildings are not there anymore. Now there is a bank. They changed a few years ago. Anyway, we started out, the two of us, with an idea of building one instrument. And we did the instruments, and little by little, we grew the company. The question is, how did we get through all these steps? We were lucky with our first instrument, and the first instrument had a lot of innovation. It was a spectrofluorometer, and at the time, it was the only spectrofluorometer that was fully automated. There were other companies, some were fairly large, but their instruments require the direct intervention of the user in front of the instrument. While we introduced an instrument that it was fully automated, there was a protocol signed at the beginning, so the user could just press spacebar, start the measurements, go for a coffee, come back after 3 hours, and the measurements were acquired. So this was, let's say, our lucky instrument. But lucky also because we were in a lucky place. There was the university. We interacted a lot with the university. And in fact, my advice to all of you, and maybe there is no need to give an advice, is really take advantage of these big benefits that we have here in Urbana-Champaign. We have a great resource. And every time we need something, we need to go to the experts. We are not the experts. If we start a company, if we start a business, our mind is in different directions. We cannot go to all of the details of testing an instrument. And so having collaborations with the expert is a key point in order to be successful. In fact, we continue this tradition. We have collaboration with several universities across the United States, and we try to pick up the experts for the specific instruments that we want to work with. Of course, when you start a company, there are a lot of factors that play. One of the first one is financing. Well, when me and my partner started, we didn't have money. We just started building the instruments. We had some savings, very small savings. So then we started looking for some loans. And I have to say, I looked at several banks here in town, at least 5. But I was very lucky because then I found a person in a very small and locally owned bank who liked what we were doing, and he gave us a loan right away. And I was surprised. I said, wow, that's interesting. And in fact, even today, I would say, if you need a loan, you might be better off at the beginning to talk to a bank that is maybe smaller, locally owned, rather than a large bank, because the large bank has to follow some protocols, some rules, which are not determined in Champaign. Maybe they are determined in Chicago, New York. Of course, today there are also other opportunities. There are venture capitalists, which play a very important role. Now I understand there is also this angel venture starting here in town. So these are all possibilities that one should explore. Another source for financing, although we didn't really pursue it at the very beginning, is the SBIR grants. We wrote a few grants, but we started a few years after. And SBIR grants are great because it's basically a present. And we have the money to design a new instruments, and in fact, we used that money to design the Oxiplex, and NIH gave us funds also to conduct clinical trials. We wouldn't have this type of funds. And that's why I'm saying these are just great. I'm just grateful to NIH for funding us to go through this process. Well, as the company grows, one of the important factors is how to establish processes. You add people, and you want people to build exactly the same product day after day with the same performances, the same capabilities. So we need to develop documentation, develop quality standards, and this is very important for every organization. In fact, little by little, we got to the point where we got ISO certified within ISS. And the idea is just to have these quality plans in place so that we follow the standard and we follow it through. But for us, this is also another reason, is the fact that each instrument is built with a traceability in mind, which is very important. It's actually a requirement once the instrument goes out to the clinical market. We might discover 2 years down the road that maybe a component is not performing as we initially thought, but if we have the traceability system in place, we can recall the system pretty much like the auto industry does when a problem is discovered. So this is a key point that although sometimes it takes away energy, resources, but it's something that I wouldn't really overlook. It's something that I would stress for every organization. Then along with that goes also the branding. I know when we are assembling instruments, when we are starting, we are designing instruments, we are all taken by the technical issue, hardware, software. We don't think of the aesthetics. We don't think even of creating a brand. But I think that is important. And of course, I have my preferences. If I look at Apple computer and the products of Apple, I say, wow, that is really a goal. We're far away. We are light miles away from that. But I think it's also important because if you pay a little more attention to the fact that what the instrument looks like or how the instrument is being used, the software, it's much easier to sell it. In other words, there is an aesthetic component that is very important. And this goes by everything we do in life. I mean, if I go here in the research park, I see there are buildings. They are not utilitarian buildings. They are buildings that have been built with criterion. The landscape outside is very nice. I can take a walk. I feel a nice atmosphere. And this is all part of the branding. Of course, when you build instruments, you want to sell instruments. So the question is how to sell them. In our case, it's relatively easy because our instruments are used for research. Usually, we go to conferences where researchers that we think will use our instruments go. And there are a few of these venues throughout the year. So we go there, we buy the space for a booth, we send a couple of people, and we display the instruments, we display a flyer. But the point is that not everything can be done through the resources in-house. So we need to rely on the outside, especially if you sell outside the country. So you need to hire sales organization, people that know how to sell, how to go out to the proper places. And this is another effort that that initially it looks like more of a longer-term investment, but it's very important because it's probably one of the most important, because at the end is the one that sends you order and drives the business and keeps the business going. And with that, as you start installing more instruments, and we have, like for the spectrophlorometer, we have about 350 worldwide installed. The near infrared, we have about 150. So there is the issue of the customer support. Customer support works at two different levels. One is really the customer support for hardware. Well, a component of the instrument doesn't work or the computer broke, and that is relatively easy. When you work in research, there is another type of customer support, and is application support. People try to push the instrument to the limit because they are in research. They want to get the latest results, and sometimes they don't use the instruments as it is designed to be used for. And so they call us and they ask for help, for support. And this puts a strain on the organization because the only way to provide the support is just to have qualified people within the organization who know the instrument inside out, but who also know about the application of the instrument. And so this is, again, something that I would stress depending upon the particular interest of the instrument. Does it go to the consumers? Does it go to the research? Finally, I would like to mention that when you grow an organization, there is always a struggle between your personal life and the life of the people around you. And I don't think I have a recipe for that, because I'm struggling every day to try to get to a balancing act. And I guess, I'm sure that each of you has gone through the same type of troubles. Anyway, thank you very much for your attention, and I will be happy to address and answer any questions you might have. Tim.
Where do you see the company in, say, 5 years now?
That's a good question. So the research market is pretty flat. I mean, there is so much research. The money for the research comes from the government, our government, the governments abroad, some through the companies, but it's pretty much stable. For us, the big growth will be the clinical version of the instrument. There are 8,000 hospitals in the United States alone, another 8,000 in Europe, so this is where we're pushing. Yes?
If you don't mind saying, is the company still completely privately owned, or had you taken outside funding, or how long were you able to go before you entered that stage where you took outside funding?
It's still privately owned. We never had, we only have a line of credit with banks, but we might need, I'm pretty sure we will need outside help as soon as we will be ready to do the next step.
So 20 or so years with no outside funding.
Right.
That's great.
Yeah.
It's a great accomplishment.
Laura?
Ben, you were awarded the Excellence in Management Award at Innovation Celebration a few years ago. Tell us a little bit more about your management style and how you've motivated a team over the years to get to the point where you've had the success you have.
Well, first I have in the break room an espresso machine. And
We give out lots of coffee here, too.
I'm sure. I'm sure. I honestly don't have any specific style in the sense that the company is small. Still, we're a little less than 40 people, so we all interact each other, although I have to say I travel a lot and maybe I shouldn't travel that much. And it's divided in groups. There is a production manager, an R&D manager, a person in charge, and so I relate mostly to these people. For the rest, it's, I would say we're pretty relaxed.
And finding the right people to serve in those roles, how have you been able to recruit the talent?
That is one of the challenges, I would say, because it's not always easy to find people. Even if we are in a university town, it's not necessarily easy. In fact, we recruited some people from outside, and, but it's very important, partly because we are very specific in terms of the requirements. For instance, for the fluorescence, the fluorometers, last year we recruited this person from the Netherlands. He's been working at university for 10 years, and then he came to Champaign. So, well, of course, I mean, we know his background, his experience, and we do that way when we are looking for senior people. Alan.
Have you been through the FDA approval process, and if so, could you share some insights on that?
We started it as we went through the redesign of the oximeter. We interacted with FDA, and we documented the process conducive to building this new version of the instruments. The process itself, the approval process, is waiting for the final version of the instrument. We need to have, let's say, the box ready, give FDA the box, but we need to make sure that we're not going to change anything in the unit itself. And so it will most likely, so now we are at the point where we are looking for an industrial designer to design the case and the unit, so it might take another 3-5 months. At that point, I really hope that we will have the unit done and we will complete the steps. But so my advice is for that issue, and I also follow other people's advice, is just to contact somebody at NIH, at FDA at the very beginning. Explain to them what we plan to do and be open with them. And in fact, we also learn through this process from them so that everything is just out on the table and they know what we've been doing, and it's also easier for them once they have the unit to do the evaluation and to do whatever tests they need to do.
So is this a 510K approval?
Yes, it's a 510K, yes.
One of the other processes you've gone through that you referenced was ISO certification, which I know can be cumbersome and difficult for companies to do. Can you share some more thoughts about how long it took to go through that process and what was involved?
Right. So we actually, this was a suggestion from FDA because at the time, and this was in 2003, I guess, 2004, when we approached FDA, they told us, are you ISO certified? No, well, start with ISO, then come back to us. And so we learned, and we were lucky because IMEC, the Illinois Manufacturing Extension Center, had a program here in town run through Parkland. And we attended this program, these classes, and little by little we learned how to establish this quality plan. And we've been certified, I think, 6 years ago, because this year will be the second recertification, although the auditors come in every year. At the beginning, we did a system that was probably more complicated than what we needed. Now we are in the process of simplifying it. And I guess it's the experience, the time we spent with the process. Yes, like everything, it takes energy, resources, but the issue is just to balance this investment versus the benefits that we will get out of it.
No more questions? Thank you again very much, Ben.
Thank you.
Assuming you'll stick around for questions.